imagine a single song, just one song that is so incredibly powerful, so profoundly stirring that it literally helped topple the largest empire in the world. Yet, this song was born almost entirely by accident, and it was hidden in the pages of a 19th century Bengali novel about these rogue, weapon-wielding ascetic monks.
It sounds like fantasy, doesn't it?
It sounds exactly like modern historical fiction, but it is a very real, very tangible piece of our global history. Now, before we step into this incredible narrative today, I just want to take a quick moment to humbly welcome you to the Simplified Summary YouTube channel.
We are so glad you're here.
We really are immensely grateful for your time, for inviting us into your day. Our mission here is to bring you the most comprehensive, engaging, and detailed deep dives into monumental works of literature and history. So if you find value in this session today, if you gain a new perspective, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with anyone who has a passion for history and literature. Your support is the engine that allows us to keep creating these incredibly detailed sessions just for you.
It really is. It's truly a privilege to have you with us for this deep dive.
Yeah.
The ongoing support from the Simplified Summary community is exactly what makes this level of intense, focused analysis possible.
Absolutely. And today's deep dive is, well, it's a massive undertaking. We are embarking on a really comprehensive exploration of the landmark 1882 Bengali novel Anandamath, which translates to the Abbey of Bliss.
Right.
It was written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, who is a figure that just casts this extraordinarily long shadow over Indian literature and political thought.
He really does. And to ensure we're giving you the most robust and nuanced understanding possible today, we are examining a highly critical centenary edition of the book.
Yeah, this isn't just a standard paperback.
No, not at all. This edition includes an extensive historical preface known as the Bhumika, written by leading scholars, alongside detailed chapter excerpts. Crucially, it also features a series of English critical commentaries that focus specifically on the text's most famous and honestly historically debated song, Vande Mataram.
Right. And our mission for this session is multifaceted. We're going to dissect the plot of the novel, obviously. But we also need to peel back the layers of the actual historical reality behind Bankim's fiction. We really want to examine the profound, often challenging philosophical questions he raised about duty, nationalism, and the ultimate and sometimes terrifying price of sacrifice.
It's a heavy text.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand Anandamath, we cannot just open to page 1 and look at the characters in total isolation. We have to set the scene. And the canvas upon which this story is painted is one of unimaginable, almost apocalyptic despair.
That's the only way to describe it.
We need to begin with the famine of 1770, known historically as the Chiaterer Manwantar.
Yes. That historical backdrop is the absolute foundational key to the entire text. You cannot possibly understand the psychology of the characters in Anandamath or the radical nature of the rebellion it depicts without understanding the sheer hellscape of Bengal in 1770.
Hellscape is the right word.
The text and the accompanying historical prefaces detail the logistical and human catastrophe of this era in great detail. So at this time, the British East India Company had recently acquired something called the Diwani.
The Diwani, right.
Yeah, the Diwani. This was the formal right, granted by the declining Mughal emperor, to collect revenues in the province of Bengal. Their primary revenue collector on the ground was a man named Muhammad Raza Khan.
But, having the right to collect revenue isn't exactly the same thing as governing, is it? I mean, it seems like a recipe for total exploitation if you only hold the financial reins but none of the civic responsibility.
That is precisely the root of the catastrophe. It was a dual system of government.
Right.
The East India Company had the military power and the right to extract wealth. But the actual administration, criminal justice, infrastructure, the daily governance known as the Nizamat, all of that was left to the local Nawab.
Who I assume had no money to actually do any of that.
Exactly. The Nawab had been entirely stripped of the funds required to actually run the country. It was a system of responsibilities of statecraft.
Wow.
So when a severe drought hit in 1769, the agricultural system simply collapsed. There was no safety net. The resulting famine was of unprecedented proportions. It wiped out roughly 1/3 of the population in the province. We are talking about an estimated 10 million people perishing from starvation and the diseases that inevitably follow in the wake of malnutrition.
10 million people. It is a number so staggeringly large that it almost loses its meaning until you force yourself to visualize the reality on the ground.
It's hard to even picture.
We are talking about entire villages turning into ghost towns, agricultural infrastructure just rotting away, and roads literally lined with the dead. And, here is a detail from our sources that really forces you to reevaluate the administrative mechanics of the time.
The tax detail.
Yes, the tax detail. Despite this massive death toll, the British administration didn't launch a massive relief effort. According to the historical records we're examining, they actually increased the tax collection
By 10%.
by 10% the following year in 1771, while 10 million people are dying.
The sheer bureaucratic coldness of that decision is what Bankim is reacting to in his novel. The East India Company was operating strictly as a profit-driven corporation answering to shareholders in London, not as a sovereign government with a moral duty to its subjects.
Right.
The historical prefaces in our centenary edition bring up a very poignant observation made later by Lord Macaulay. When he was reflecting on the administrations of figures like Warren Hastings and Robert Clive, Macaulay condemned this specific era in Bengal as an appalling display of power without responsibility.
Power without responsibility. That phrase just chills you. I want you listening right now to try and imagine a world where the social contract has completely and utterly disintegrated.
Just vanished.
The authorities aren't just turning a blind eye to your suffering, they're actively demanding more from you while your community literally starves to death around you. This absolute despair, this total collapse of societal order, morality, and safety is the exact toxic soil from which the story of Anandamath grows. It is the core justification for the extreme measures the characters eventually take.
And it is out of that very soil that a specific type of rebellion sprouts. Which brings us to a crucial question about the text itself and the intersection of history and literature. Bankim Chandra wrote a novel, yes, but he rooted it in this very real, verifiable historical trauma.
Which naturally leads me to ask how much of the narrative in Anandamath is actually historically accurate. I mean, we have this terrifying, documented historical backdrop of the famine. But what about the ascetic monks themselves? Were there actual bands of weapon-wielding holy men roaming the countryside, fighting the British?
That's the big question, and the editors of our centenary edition address this explicitly in the Bhumika. They make it very clear that Bankim Chandra was not attempting to write a dry, factual, historical chronicle.
Okay.
He was a novelist, and he was a political philosopher. He believed that merely transcribing dates, names, and troop movements wasn't enough to capture the essence of an era. He was trying to capture what he considered the inner truth.
The inner...
Right, the spiritual and psychological reality of the time. So, to answer your question, yes, the Santan monks in the book The Children, as they translate it, they are based on real historical figures. There was an actual event known as the Sannyasi Rebellion that peaked around 1772.
But I have to imagine the historical reality of an uprising during a massive famine was, well, far less organized than what Bankim portrays in the book.
Oh, significantly less organized. These were ascetic warriors who roamed across Bengal and Bihar. But Bankim actually faced considerable criticism from historians for the creative liberties he took with their identity.
Oh, so...
Well, the real historical rebels of 1772 were a highly complex, disorganized, and fractured coalition. They included Shaivite monks ascetics devoted to Shiva, who were often covered in ash and carrying tridents.
Right.
But they fought alongside Sufi fakirs, who were Islamic mystics. And crucially, their ranks were swelled by a massive influx of displaced, starving peasants and disbanded soldiers. People who had lost their land and essentially took to militant looting just to survive the famine.
So the reality was a desperate, multi-religious struggle for survival by people pushed to the absolute physical limit.
Exactly.
But Bankim completely transforms them in the novel. He strips away the Sufi fakirs. He sidelines the Shaivite ascetics. And he reimagines these desperate rebels as a highly organized, deeply educated, and fiercely ideological army of Vaishnavite Brahmins. Devotees of Vishnu, characterized in the book by an intense, almost militant disciplined devotion.
He fundamentally sanitizes and elevates them. He gives them a uniform ideology, a strict monastic code of conduct, and a singular, noble purpose.
It's like taking a chaotic historical riot and reimagining it through the lens of an epic, spiritual superhero origin story. But why make that deliberate alteration? If the real history already featured an uprising against the East India Company, why not just write them as the complex, messy coalition they actually were? Doesn't altering the historical record undermine the power of the narrative?
It might to a modern historian reading it today. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at Bankim's motives as an author living in the late 19th century. You must consider his contemporary audience.
Right, the 1880s.
Exactly. Bankim was writing in the 1880s for a Bengali society that felt deeply defeated. They felt intellectually marginalized and culturally subservient after more than a century of entrenched British colonial rule. This romanticization of the sannyasis was highly intentional.
He was trying to build them up.
Yes, he was trying to inject a sense of pride, martial valor, and historical agency into a population that felt it had none. By transforming the historical sannyasis into disciplined, philosophical warrior monks, he was creating an idealized mythos for his people. He was projecting backward to create a template for the future, essentially saying to his readers, we have a history of disciplined resistance, a profound organization, and of sacrificing everything for the motherland.
That context really reframes the entire experience of reading the novel. You aren't just reading a historical adventure. You are reading a calculated piece of political philosophy designed to wake up a dormant society.
Perfectly said.
And the way he chooses to wake them up is incredibly visceral. He plunges the reader straight into the nightmare of the 1770 famine. Let's walk through those devastating opening scenes because they really serve as the inciting incident for everything that follows.
They set the stakes immediately.
The novel introduces us to a man named Mahendra and his wife Kalyani. Now, they aren't starving peasants initially. They are a wealthy, comfortable family from a village called Padmachinya.
Which is a brilliant narrative choice by Bankim. He uses Mahendra and Kalyani to demonstrate the great equalizer of total societal collapse.
Right.
Wealth, status, land ownership, all of these things become entirely meaningless when the agricultural system fails, and there is literally no food available for purchase. You can have all the gold in the world, but if there's no rice, you starve.
You can't eat gold.
Exactly. The text paints scenes of absolute horrifying degradation. As Mahendra and Kalyani are forced to abandon their ancestral village in search of food, they witness humanity reduced to its most primal instincts.
It gets so dark.
People are eating leaves from the trees, chewing on wild grass. And the narrative heavily implies that some resort to unspeakable acts cannibalism just to quiet the agonizing biological panic of starvation.
The breakdown of the social order is total, and in the pure chaos of fleeing this living nightmare, trying to find any safe route out of the province, Mahendra and Kalyani are separated. Kalyani, who is clutching their infant daughter, is chased into the dark forest by desperate bandits.
And the true tragedy of that scene is that these bandits aren't professional criminals.
No.
They were just starving villagers turned violent by sheer desperation.
Yeah.
Kalyani eventually passes out from sheer exhaustion and terror in the woods.
And this moment of absolute vulnerability is the narrative pivot of the whole book. It is where the paths of our mundane, secular characters intersect with the extraordinary clandestine world of the Santans. Kalyani is rescued from the forest by a mysterious, imposing monk named Habananda.
While at the same time, Mahendra, who is searching frantically for his wife and child, crosses paths with the ultimate spiritual and strategic leader of this ascetic rebellion.
A man named Satyananda.
Let's examine the structure of this monastic order because, as you mentioned, Bankim didn't write them as a loose gang of rebels. They have a strict hierarchy. Satyananda is the supreme guru.
He is.
He is the visionary architect of the rebellion, a man whose entire existence is focused purely on the liberation of the land. Under him, serving as his top generals and enforcers of the monastic code, are Habananda the monk, who just rescued Kalyani, and another fierce warrior named Jibananda.
What is particularly sophisticated about Bankim's writing here is that he absolutely refuses to make his characters flawless, one-dimensional saints.
They're very human. Very human. Even though he elevated the historical sannyasis into an idealized army for political purposes, he still imbues them with profound, often destructive human weaknesses. For instance, Habananda, despite having taken the most rigorous, holy vows of asceticism and celibacy, becomes deeply, overwhelmingly infatuated with Kalyani from the very moment he rescues her.
That is such a fascinating psychological element. You have this fearless warrior who has ostensibly renounced the material world, who is engaged in a holy war, and yet he is entirely undone by basic human desire.
It's the classic internal conflict.
It adds such a thick layer of tension to the narrative. It showcases Bankim's commitment to portraying the flawed, messy reality of human nature, even within this idealized framework. It makes the monks feel real, and it makes the vows they took seem incredibly heavy.
Heavy is an understatement.
Which brings us to those vows. When Mahendra decides he wants to join this rebellion, he doesn't just sign a piece of paper. The initiation ceremony is harrowing. Here's where it gets really interesting.
The price of becoming a child, a Santan, is almost unfathomable to a modern reader. We aren't talking about swearing allegiance to a flag or joining a conventional military. The initiation, as laid out in the text, requires a systematic, absolute annihilation of the initiate's previous identity.
Total erasure.
It is a complete severing of ties to the material world. First, a Santan must completely renounce their caste.
In the context of 19th century Hindu society, or even 18th century when the novel is set, that is a radical, almost unthinkable step, isn't it? The caste system dictated almost every aspect of social interaction.
It dictated marriage, profession, diet, and social standing. To renounce it was to step outside of society entirely. But within the Abbey of Bliss, Bankim envisions a radical egalitarianism. All monks become one single caste. They are all equally children of the motherland.
That part I can see the strategic value in.
Right. Second, they must renounce all personal wealth. Any money, property, or land they hold must be given entirely to the rebellion's war chest to fund the acquisition of weapons and supplies.
Again, the erasure of social status and wealth makes sense for a monastic military order, but the third vow is the one that really demands scrutiny. They must renounce their family, utterly and completely.
That is the most brutal requirement. Mahendra, who has just been reunited with the knowledge that his wife and child are actually alive, is told directly by Sakyananda that he cannot see them again until the mission is complete.
And the mission is liberating the entire land from oppression and establishing a new kingdom. That is a monumental task that could easily take a lifetime, if it is achieved at all.
Exactly.
Wait, let's pause and really analyze this. Abandoning your family to save your country, doesn't that fundamentally break the very society you're trying to save? How can you build a society if the prerequisite for fighting for it is destroying the nuclear family? It borders on the sociopathic.
You are hitting on the central moral tension that Bankim constructs. Satyananda makes the severity of the rules explicitly clear. If a monk yields to physical desire, if he attempts to reclaim his old life, or if he breaks his vow of celibacy, the penalty isn't just expulsion from the order.
It's much worse.
The penalty is death by fire. They must willingly walk into a pyre to cleanse the sin of returning to their humanity.
Death by fire for wanting to see your wife. That shifts the perspective entirely. They aren't just a political militia. They are a terrifyingly pure religious cult of nationalism. The text inextricably links their spiritual salvation to their success on the battlefield and their absolute adherence to these vows.
Bankim forces the reader to grapple with the terrifying cost of revolution. He is asking whether that level of absolute fanatical detachment is a superpower. Does it make them an unstoppable fighting force because they have literally severed every emotional tie that could be used as leverage against them?
Or is it a fatal flaw?
Right. Could you truly fight for the future of a society if you've deliberately destroyed your own human connection to it? The novel doesn't offer easy answers to that. And it is within this atmosphere of absolute religious fervor and patriotic sacrifice that the novel introduces its most enduring real-world legacy.
This brings us to the moment that literally changed history, the introduction of the song Vande Mataram. Paint the picture of this scene for us. How does a song that would eventually become a national battle cry first appear in the narrative?
It happens during Mahendra's initial journey with Habananda, before Mahendra has taken the vows. Mahendra is still a conventional, somewhat sheltered man. He doesn't yet understand the radical, encompassing ideology of these ascetic warriors. As they are traveling through the landscape, Habananda, who is overwhelmed with a sudden surge of emotion, begins to sing Vande Mataram.
And Mahendra listens to the lyrics, which are praising the physical beauty of the land, the rivers, the trees, the fertile soil, and he is deeply confused. He turns to Habananda and essentially says, "This is not our mother, this is our country. You are singing to dirt and water."
And Habananda's reply is arguably the thesis statement of the entire novel. He states that the Santans recognize no other mother. For them, the motherland is the only deity they worship. They have bypassed the traditional pantheon. The physical land of Bengal, and by extension the entire subcontinent, is the divine mother.
The physical land itself.
Yes, and the construction of the song itself is a masterpiece of linguistic and cultural fusion. The critical commentaries in our sources spend a great deal of time analyzing how Bankim actually composed Vande Mataram. He used a unique, highly deliberate mix of Sanskrit and Bengali.
I want to dig into that. Why mix the languages? Why not write a pure Bengali anthem for the common people, or a pure Sanskrit hymn for the educated elites? What does the fusion actually achieve?
It is all about the emotional resonance each language carries. Sanskrit is the ancient classical language of Hindu scripture, by using Sanskrit phrases like Vande Mataram, which translates to "I bowed to thee, mother," and Sujalam Sufalam, meaning rich with water, rich with fruit. Bankim imbues the song with an immense ancient scriptural gravity.
Right, it sounds eternal.
It sounds like a timeless religious hymn that has existed for millennia. But he seamlessly weaves in Bengali, the vernacular. Bengali is the language of the hearth, the language of daily emotional life, the language of the common people. By fusing them, the song strikes a chord that is simultaneously deeply sacred and fiercely, immediately patriotic. It connects the ancient divine to the present, physical reality.
That duality, the blurring of the line between religious devotion and political patriotism, sparked a massive historical controversy that we absolutely need to explore. The English appendices in the Centenary edition detail this extensively. Let's look at the great debate over what Vande Mataram actually means and why it became so polarizing.
The controversy centers entirely on interpretation and translation. To understand the political power of the song, you have to understand how different demographic and political groups read it. The most literal translation is simply, "I reverence thee, mother." But as the song progresses, the imagery becomes highly specific. It describes the mother holding weapons, possessing millions of voices, and driving back enemies.
And this is where Dr. G.A. Grierson enters the picture. He was a prominent linguist and scholar whose views are documented in our source text, and he took a very rigid stance on the song's meaning.
He did. Grierson argued that Vande Mataram was an explicit, undeniable invocation of the Hindu goddesses Kali and Durga. He pointed directly to the lines describing Durga bearing 10 weapons. Therefore, Grierson and the critics who aligned with his linguistic interpretation argued that the song was purely religious, highly sectarian, and entirely alien to non-Hindus.
Because it's praising a specific Hindu goddess.
Exactly. They argued it was exclusionary, meant only for a specific religious demographic, and could not function as a secular national anthem.
But how did the opposing side justify their stance? Did they have actual proof that the song wasn't just a religious hymn dedicated to Durga?
The sources present fierce counter-arguments from figures like Sir Henry Cotton and particularly S.M. Mitra. Mitra directly challenged Grierson's interpretation by arguing that the song was not a literal worship of mythological deities, but a poetic personification of the province of Bengal itself.
And Mitra used demographic data to prove his point, didn't he?
He did, and it's fascinating. Mitra pointed out a specific line in the song that mentions twice 70 millions of hands. He noted that this number, 140 million hands, representing 70 million people, corresponded precisely to the demographic population of the Bengal province at the time Bankim wrote the novel in the early 1880s.
That is a brilliant piece of literary analysis. It grounds a seemingly mythological poem in hard empirical reality.
Mitra used this demographic data to prove that Vande Mataram was a patriotic hymn aimed squarely at the physical land and its actual living citizens. His argument was logical. If Bankim were writing a purely mythological hymn to an ancient eternal goddess, why would he cite the exact temporary census data of 19th century Bengal?
He wouldn't.
Exactly. Therefore, Mitra argued, it was a political anthem wrapped in religious metaphor, utilizing familiar cultural symbols to mobilize a modern political sentiment.
The ambiguity isn't a flaw in Bankim's writing. It is the secret to the song's unimaginable power. By blurring the line between religious devotion and political patriotism, Bankim created a psychological tool that bypasses the logical brain and hits straight at the soul. To fight for the country was to fight for God. That is a volatile, world-changing mixture.
It is the ultimate synthesis of the sacred and the secular.
And speaking of synthesizing different roles and breaking boundaries, we have to talk about one of the most dynamic, surprising characters in the entire novel. A character who defies almost every expectation of 19th century literature. We need to talk about Shanti.
Shanti is an absolute revelation within the text. She is the wife of Jibananda, one of Satyananda's top generals. The Bhumika editors give her immense praise, noting how radically she departs from the conventional literary norms of the era. Let's establish her background, because Bankim sets her up as an unconventional figure long before the rebellion starts.
So he was a tomboy, essentially.
Yeah, very much so. She was orphaned early in life and raised alongside boys. She is described as physically strong, athletic, and entirely unbothered by the strict, restrictive societal norms placed on women in traditional Bengali society at the time.
So when her husband, Jibananda, leaves her to join the Santan rebellion, taking his vow of celibacy and abandoning his family, what is she expected to do? The societal expectation for a 19th century woman in that scenario is to stay home, maintain her piety, weep for his absence, and suffer in noble silence.
That is the archetype. But Shanti completely rejects that archetype.
She decides that sitting around and waiting just isn't for her. She cuts her hair, she binds her chest, she dresses entirely as a male ascetic, takes on the male name Nabinananda, and marches straight into the forest to join the rebellion herself.
It's an incredible narrative turn.
It's amazing.
It is a brilliant subversion of the gender dynamics. But Bankim doesn't just treat it as an action-adventure trope. He infuses her actions with deep philosophical weight. Eventually, she arrives at the Abbey of Bliss, and Satyananda, the supreme guru who enforces these draconian vows, discovers her true identity.
Oh boy.
He confronts her, fully expecting her to leave immediately. He cites the strict vows the men have taken to abandon their families, arguing that her presence is a literal threat to the spiritual purity of the rebellion.
But she doesn't back down. She debates the supreme guru, and she uses traditional scripture to justify her presence on the battlefield. How exactly does she outmaneuver him philosophically?
She argues using the ancient concept of ardhangini. This is the idea that a wife is the half-body or the spiritual completion of the husband. They are not two separate spiritual entities, but one.
Okay.
She calmly explains to Satyananda that if a husband and wife are spiritually one entity, then her husband, Jibanda, hasn't truly renounced his earthly ties, nor has he fulfilled his dharma, unless his other half, Shanti herself, is fighting right alongside him.
That is genius. She essentially weaponizes the patriarchy's own religious doctrines to demand a place in the war. It is intellectually brilliant. And she isn't just there to make a point. She becomes an active participant. She spies, she fights, and she often displays more courage and strategic cunning than the men around her.
The prefaces note that scholars compare Shanti to the ultimate ideal of Nishkam karma found in the Bhagavad Gita.
Let's define Nishkam karma for the listener, because it's crucial to understanding her character's elevation above the others.
Nishkam karma translates roughly to desireless action, or action performed without any expectation of personal reward. While the other monks constantly struggle with their egos, their buried desires, or their fanaticism, like Habananda's tragic obsession with Kalyani, Shanti operates on a different spiritual plane.
She doesn't have those ego issues.
None at all. She fights with a pure, untroubled heart. She fights not for personal glory, not for power over the land, and not even out of blind religious fanaticism. She fights out of a pure sense of duty, out of love for her husband and love for her country. Because she doesn't desire power, she is immune to the corruption that threatens the other Santans. She's arguably the most spiritually evolved character in the entire book.
She serves as the moral and emotional anchor of the rebellion. But while the philosophical debates are fascinating, Anandamath is, at its core, a war novel. The drums of war start beating louder and louder as the narrative progresses. We need to look at the tactics, the military escalation, and the sheer brutality of the clashes with the British forces and the Nawab's troops.
The military escalation in the novel is meticulously detailed, tracking the evolution of a rebellion. The Santans do not start as an invincible standing army. They begin as disorganized bands.
Right, they're hiding out.
Exactly. They utilize the dense, labyrinthine terrain of the forests around the Anandamath to their advantage. They are masters of guerrilla warfare, striking supply lines quickly and retreating into the shadows where the conventional, heavily burdened armies cannot follow.
The text mentions specific encounters that highlight this shift in military power. There's the defeat of Captain Thomas, a British officer who grossly underestimates the monks, viewing them merely as undisciplined bandits rather than a highly motivated ascetic militia.
A fatal mistake.
And then there's the rising panic of Major Edwards as the Santans begin to transition from a localized nuisance to a legitimate strategic military threat.
Bankim describes how the Santans evolve from guerrilla fighters to a conventional force. They capture weapons from the fallen, they learn the use of modern firearms, and crucially, they acquire artillery. The capture of cannons is what transforms them into a formidable standing army capable of holding territory.
The climactic battles are depicted with an almost cinematic scale. The novel portrays thousands of ascetics, dressed in saffron robes, chanting Vande Mataram at the top of their lungs, charging headlong into cannon fire. They achieve crushing, overwhelming victories over the combined formal forces of the British East India Company and the local Nawab's troops.
However, a close reading of the text reveals that Bankim does not shy away from the chaotic, horrific reality of these battles. He does not paint it as a glorious, sterile combat where righteous heroes neatly defeat villains.
No, it gets incredibly dark.
Very dark. Once the Santans break the military lines, the text describes widespread looting, immense confusion, and acts of brutal, bloody revenge. The monks and the desperate peasants who have joined their ranks unleash years of pent-up rage against the local Muslim rulers and the British officers.
Because these were the authorities who had callously extracted taxes while their families starved during the famine. The violence becomes systemic and indiscriminate.
It is a sobering reminder that Bankim, while romanticizing the ideals and the discipline of the Santans, was also documenting the terrifying reality of an uprising born from total societal collapse. The beast of war, once unleashed, consumes everything in its path, regardless of the lofty vows taken beforehand. But this leads us directly to the most perplexing, debated, and philosophically dense part of the entire novel.
The ending.
Yes.
This is where the narrative takes a turn that has baffled readers for over a century. Let's set the stage. The Santans have won. They have defeated the British forces and the Nawab's army. They hold the territory. The capital is theirs for the taking. Satyananda, the visionary guru who has orchestrated this entire rebellion, who has sacrificed everything and demanded his followers do the same, is ready to establish a permanent, independent kingdom. The dream is realized. We expect the traditional triumphant music to swell, right?
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
But Bankim delivers a shocking twist. Just as Satyananda is standing on the precipice of ultimate historical victory, a mysterious figure appears to him.
The text refers to him as the physician or the healer, and in some critical analyses, he is interpreted as a Mahapurush, a great spiritual master, or a divine messenger representing the ultimate truth.
This physician appears to Satyananda and issues a devastating, incomprehensible command. He tells him that the war is over. The fighting must stop immediately, and Satyananda must lay down his arms, dissolve the Santan army, and abandon the rebellion.
And Satyananda is understandably outraged. He is in an absolute agony. He essentially argues, we won, the land is ours, the oppressors are defeated. Why on earth would we stop now when the goal is within our grasp?
To understand the physician's answer, we must unpack the deeply philosophical reasoning provided in the text. Bankim uses the character of the physician to articulate a complex, sweeping theory about the evolution of civilization and the nature of knowledge itself. The healer explains that true religion, or Sanatan Dharma, requires a balance of two distinct types of knowledge: internal knowledge and external knowledge.
Okay, let's break those down, because this is the crux of the novel's controversial conclusion. What exactly constitutes internal versus external knowledge in Bankim's philosophical framework?
Internal knowledge is spiritual wisdom. It is the understanding of the soul, of morality, of the divine relationship. It is the philosophy encapsulated in the Vedas and the Upanishads. The physician argues that India possesses vast, unparalleled reserves of this internal knowledge. However, he states that over the centuries, India has entirely lost its external knowledge.
And external knowledge refers to the hard sciences, the mechanics of running a physical society.
Exactly. External knowledge is objective, scientific, material knowledge. It is the knowledge of physics, economics, modern administration, military organization, and societal infrastructure. The physician argues a harsh truth: without external knowledge, internal knowledge becomes stagnant, speculative, and ultimately defenseless in the physical world. You cannot protect your spiritual heritage if you do not have the objective science and administrative capability to build a functioning, prosperous, and secure society.
So how does this theory justify stopping a successful rebellion and allowing the British to retake control of the land?
The healer lays out a startling proposition for Satyananda. He argues that the British rule is not a permanent subjugation, but a necessary temporary phase of education. The British, he argues, possess superior external knowledge. Therefore, India must temporarily submit to British rule in order to learn the objective sciences, the modern administration, and the empirical methods of the West.
Because they're supposed to be students.
Right. Only by absorbing this external knowledge from the British can Indians eventually reconcile it with their own ancient spiritual heritage. Once that synthesis is achieved, India will be truly ready for independence, not just as a reactionary military force, but as an enlightened, modern, self-sustaining nation.
That is a staggering argument to make at the climax of a novel dedicated to patriotic rebellion. It is essentially a defense of colonialism as a painful but necessary tutelage. And the final scene of the novel reflects the sheer emotional weight of that argument. It is heart-wrenching. Satyananda, a man who has ordered his followers to burn themselves alive for the cause, who has orchestrated a massive bloody war, is left weeping in deep profound agony.
It destroys him.
He refuses to accept this logic. He screams that he does not want British rule, that he only wants the motherland to be free. But ultimately, his physical strength is gone, his spiritual authority is superseded by the position, and he is led away into the Himalayas. The Santan rebellion is dissolved at the exact moment of its military victory.
This ending raises an incredibly important question, one that historians and literary scholars have debated fiercely. Why did Bankim Chandra write this specific conclusion? Remember, Bankim was employed as a civil servant working for the British colonial government. Was he simply trying to appease the British censors of the 1880s? Was he afraid that a novel ending with a successful, violent overthrow of the government would be banned? Or worse, lead to his own arrest for sedition?
That is the pragmatic, cynical view, but is it possible he genuinely believed it? Did he look at the fractured, technologically lagging state of India in the 19th century and genuinely believe that an immediate return to traditional rule would result in another collapse? Did he view a period of painful modernization under the British as a historical necessity before true, lasting independence could be achieved?
The centenary edition sources leave that question open, just as Bankim himself did. It remains one of the most brilliant, frustrating, and complex conclusions in global literature. It forces the reader to distinguish between the emotional, intoxicating high of violent revolution and the cold, practical, decades-long reality of nation-building.
What a profound journey this text takes us on. Let's briefly recap the incredible ground we've covered in this session. We started in the unimaginable horrors and absolute societal collapse of the 1770 famine, exploring the catastrophic results of the East India Company's dual system of government. We saw how Bankim Chandra took the chaotic, messy reality of the historical Sannyasi rebels and forged them into the disciplined, terrifyingly devoted Santans to inspire his 19th century readers.
We explored the absolute harrowing severity of their monastic vows, the complete renunciation of caste, wealth, and family enforced under the threat of death by fire. We dissected the linguistic genius and the historical controversies surrounding Vande Mataram, exploring how figures like S.M. Mitra proved it was a song that flawlessly merged religious devotion with geographic, demographic patriotism.
We examined the fierce, mold-breaking character of Shanti, who defied gender norms and utilized ancient philosophy to fight alongside her husband out of pure, desireless duty. We tracked the bloody, chaotic victories of the Santan army, and finally, we grappled with that philosophical shock of an ending, where absolute military victory is surrendered in the name of acquiring modern scientific knowledge.
And as we conclude, it is vital to remember the immense real-world legacy of this book. Anandamath isn't just a novel. It became a manual, a foundational text for future revolutionaries. Decades after Bankim wrote it, the song Vande Mataram leaped out of the fictional pages of the Abbey of Bliss to become the very real, very physical battle cry of the Indian independence movement. Real people marched into the streets, facing real batons and real gallows, singing the very song that Babananda sang to Mahendra in the fictional forest.
It is the ultimate proof that literature has the power to shape physical reality. And that brings me to a final, provocative thought I want to leave you with, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Bankim Chandra showed us that an idea, a song, a poem, a fictional vow can be far more dangerous, far more powerful, and far more enduring than any physical weapon. The Sands had to give up absolutely everything, their identities, their families, their wealth, their very lives, to achieve their vision of collective freedom.
Everything.
If you were faced with a crisis that demanded the ultimate sacrifice for the survival of your community, where would you draw the line? Where does personal identity end and collective duty begin? Could you sever the ties to the people you love most if you believed it was the only way to save the society they live in? Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive journey. We hope this session has brought the history, the passion, and the immense complexity of Anandamath to life for you. Once again, if you found value in this deep dive, please subscribe to the Simplified Summary YouTube channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts on the Santans and the novel's controversial ending in the comments below. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.